And welcome back to the show, everybody. I'm Joe Concha, joined by my co-host Rick Unger, Heather Hansen, and Brad Hirschfield. Secretary of State John Kerry due to arrive in Switzerland soon for a round of make-or-break negotiations. The goal is to reach a tentative deal with Iran by the end of the month. Now, less than 6 days away. And before departing for Switzerland, Kerry took a shot again at critics of the deal.
Anybody standing up in opposition to this has an obligation to stand up and put a viable, realistic alternative on the table. And I have yet to see anybody do that.
Anybody standing up in opposition? Well, I'm sorry, excuse me. There are critics on both sides of the aisle, including Senators Bob Corker and Bob Menendez. They've introduced a bill that would require the Senate to sign off on any deal with Iran. And Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has been one of the loudest critics, and earlier this month, he made his case before a joint meeting of Congress.
My friends, I've come here today because as Prime Minister of Israel, I feel a profound obligation to speak to you about an issue that could well threaten the survival of my country.
But during a news conference with Afghanistan's new president, President Obama tried to quiet the critics and say any deal would be available for Congress to thoroughly review.
If there's an agreement, it's going to be a good agreement that's good for American security and Israeli security and the region's security. And if it isn't, then there probably won't be an agreement.
While Kerry says significant progress has been made in the talks, there's still a lot of ground to cover. Among the sticking points are, and we have graphics to show you, Iran's demand to have no limits on research and development of advanced centrifuges, and those are the machines that purify uranium to use in nuclear reactors or in weapons if they're highly enriched. Another stumbling block to the deal, Iran's insistence that crippling sanctions be lifted immediately after a deal is signed. And then there's, of course, the disagreement over the length of the deal. President Obama says the restrictions should be in place for at least a decade. France, however, pushing for at least 15 years. So, U.S. and its allies have set a March 31st deadline for an initial deal to curb Iran's nuclear program. They're hoping for a final deal by the end of June. Rick Unger, will a deal get done?
I put it at about 60-40 that it will. I don't think it's nearly as clear-cut as some others would believe. I feel like the Secretary of State's been watching us because, as you know, I've been saying this over and over and over again. I can appreciate that people may not like where they think this deal is going, but I keep asking, give us a better idea. And the Secretary of State's right. We have so far not heard a better idea. It's either the Obama deal or no deal. They don't want either, but they don't tell us what they do want, and that makes it very hard.
When you start making deals with the enemy, why does there have to be a deal right now? When Netanyahu calls for, but in the meantime, Rick, when Netanyahu calls for stop wishing death to Israel, stop yelling death to America. If your daughter was going to get married to somebody who beat her, wouldn't you say, well, you know what, to settle, you know what, it's better to just marry him now than to wait and see. It means that the deal is improve your behavior, and then there's a deal.
But if they say no, then there's no deal. If there's no deal, what happens then?
What happens next is we begin to position knowing that we've smoked out the real dangers that are in place. What we know is that the worst way to go to the bargaining table is feeling you must close the deal. That's the absolute weakest place to go in. It seems to me to be strong in a bargaining moment, you need two things. A real sense that if it all goes south, you'll be fine, and a complete openness to be surprised and go places you previously thought you wouldn't go.
So what would
right now, we're scoring 100% on one and 0 on the other, and that's not good.
What would you do instead?
So I think there are a couple things. First of all, clarify to the world that no deal is a viable option. No one believes that. Second, actually, whether it's Netanyahu's benchmarks or other benchmarks that would bring us closer, and actually do to Iran, and I'm in favor of finding a way to make a deal, do to Iran what they've done here. Extend the process to our advantage, as they have been really artful at extending it to their advantage. And finally, own the fact that whatever deal we make is going to represent a whole series of downgrades. That graphic had sticking points that are left, but not all the sticking points that used to exist that were given up along the way. Let's talk about that.
Except that we don't really know. You could be right.
Right.
They've
been rumored and not disputed by what I really think is interesting here is where they're going to happen. The talks are going to happen at the Beau Rivage Palace in Lausanne.
Right.
Well, so a little quick history moment. That's actually where the Treaty of Lausanne was signed.
Oh, is that
and
where
they
it was?
broke up the Ottoman Empire.
Right.
And like the breakup of the Ottoman Empire, it gave birth to things like Iraq and other wonderful experiments in nation building. I think with the best of motivations, and I do believe the administration is well motivated, we walk ourselves into things that have consequences
All right, but
we've yet to imagine.
we only have a couple of days left now. So even with what you're saying, the ship has sailed in terms of this time around. You know, it's too late to start taking the tack that you're suggesting. There's only 3 days left.
But they're not holding to that deadline anymore.
Right.
According to the New York Times today, they now want nothing in writing, and they want to push it back
Who's
till
they?
June. The Iranians.
Oh, but you don't know that the U.S. is going to agree with that.
But no, I mean they're trying to push for March 31st, but they want to continue no sanctions.
And I shouldn't
push
say
this
the
back.
U.S., all of the P,
Right,
5 plus
5 plus
1.
1.
Right.
They want to have nothing in writing. They want to. I think that they keep
Well,
moving
it's
the
probably
goalposts.
not going to happen then.
Right.
Right, then it actually may go south. Any port in a storm is a very dangerous way to conduct a policy.
I get that.
And that's
but
what I
we're
worry
past
about.
the conducting part, and I do think that people have to focus on what it means if
Yes.
there is no deal. I'm not saying that what they're doing is better.
But
I don't
own
know.
the alternative.
But you
Right.
better
And I
understand the
think they're all-
alternative
I
or
think-
have something else to offer. And the Secretary was right. Nobody's doing that.
I wonder if a deal does get done, how many people will trust the deal itself? In other words, we saw
Nobody's
this.
going to trust the Iranians.
Right, because we saw this movie before in what country? Anybody want to answer? North Korea.
Right.
And deals were made, and then before you know it, the centrifuges are going again. They're launching missiles that are going nowhere. But still, it's just if a deal's done, I don't see anybody celebrating because no one's going to really trust that the Iranians are actually holding their end of
But
the bargain.
the advantage of the deal is that you have to recognize, I think, is that if nothing else, if it slows them down this much, it gives us time to further develop our ability to fight technologically, bring back a new Stuxnet, do different new things that can disrupt them through technological means. And I like that a lot.
But the problem is that once sanctions have been lifted and then they break the deal, which they're going to do, to put them back in place is going to take some time. And in the meantime,
Well,
they're on a runaway
not for
train.
us. And you know what? The Europeans, if they back away from
China
it, which
and
they
Russia?
probably will, they're not going to put
We
them
might not
back
have a
anyhow.
deal to be made anyway.
Exactly.
But it's also true that some of the non-violent combating of the progress
Right.
that they were making was contingent upon having real sanctions in place because it created other stresses on their system.
Right.
If we lose that, we may lose, and I agree with you, a really effective means to combat what will still be an enemy no matter what
See,
document gets signed.
if it were me, I'd buy time to just destroy their program technologically.
Some people may agree with you. The best part of this segment was the fact that we're saying 10 years, and France is
I know they're the tough
They're
guys.
saying, right, exactly. 50% more they
Good
want.
sign in my
No,
book,
me
but-
either.
Tough times have changed. Anyway, coming up next, our next story will give new meaning to the phrase nanny state. That's next.